Dr. Cyrus Vale here, practicing psychologist. What I want to talk to you today about is what I call radical ownership or radical responsibility. Pretty sure I didn't, coin the term, but when I'm saying those phrases, what I'm referring to is ownership of the mind, or perhaps less esoterically, ownership of your thoughts and feelings. Yeah, that's right. Ownership. And when I say ownership, I'm not necessarily referring to like it's your fault that you didn't make your bed or things like that. Not really. I don't mean to be doing some like tisking too much, but more I mean it technically, which is to say that when you think a thought, that thought is yours, comes from you. In fact, the term random thought, it's kind of a nonsense term. There is no random in the mind, not really. In fact, behavior in general is not random. Researchers have tried to get people to behave randomly, and they just can't really. Thoughts come from a lot of different places. They connect deeply with your feelings and your beliefs, your experiences, your associations. In fact, your mind effectively only works by association, by the way, which is to say, to be able to pair two things together, more or less. Ultimately, though, when you think a thought and you feel a feeling, it is important for you to be able to see how that comes from you and belongs to you, and ultimately, in some final sense, only you really have the power to operate on that thought. Respond to that feeling. Yes, I am referring to something like you're responsible for your reactions to things. That's true. And that can even come internally. One common scenario that I see with folks that I've worked with professionally, as well as people around me in my personal life, is a complex relationship with painful feelings. People tend to respond to painful feelings in many different ways. A lot of them end up being unhelpful, unsatisfying. They have the quality of kind of like scratching an itch, but not necessarily resolving a wound long term. And this relates a lot with what I call the primary wound. And that's kind of a bigger sort of philosophical thing that I've been working on for some time that I'll probably be ready to share soon in a fairly lengthy video. Getting back to painful feelings, let's say that someone tends to experience a lot of fear in general. They have a lot of anxiety and fear, which is to say they're very frequently concerned that some bad negative outcome is going to occur in the present or the future. And in some cases, fear can actually sort of relate to the past, like you're scared you did something bad in the past but aren't sure that you did. And then usually the concern is, how is that going to come back to haunt me later, perhaps? So this person is feeling scared. Now let's talk about something pretty easy to access for everyone, which is to say fear of driving a car and getting into a car accident. I'm not saying everyone's fraught with anxiety about it, but it's probably a fear that most people can understand. What people tend to do when they start to experience that fear and then thinking about thinking about the car accident, that is to say, what they don't see often is exactly that sequence of events with which to begin, which is I'm starting to feel fear, and my response to that is to then try to outthink it. Now, when you're dealing with a very legitimate problem that does need to be solved, or else it could, cause a lot of harm, I guess, thinking about a solution is completely reasonable to do. But it's easy to internally frame your pain, which is to say in this situation, your fear. Fear is certainly a painful feeling. It's easy to frame that as some sort of problem to be solved. And that once you can find the solution, you can ward the fear off. That's one example. It's a kind of attempting to ward off is what I like to call it. And that can take a lot of specific shapes. Solve it like a problem, something like that. Other examples, you'll have folks who tend to kind of punish themselves or sort of discipline themselves. And when I say discipline, I mean it in the sense that most people use that word these days, which is like, punish and reward and things like that. They will punish themselves when they feel like they're in pain because they feel like it's going to sort of absolve them from something. Often that punishment will come when people feel the fear of, or excuse me, the pain of shame or self-consciousness or guilt. And that can be really complicated too. Some people will feel fear and then be ashamed that they feel fear and then try to punish themselves for it. We can get into the micro details of moment by moment flow of thoughts and feelings together. There's often a fairly consistent way that works with many different people. But the bottom line is, it's important, I should say, for you to ultimately see what I'm talking about, is that your thoughts and feelings have a structure. They have an intention, your intentions, that is, even if you're not quite fully aware of them. They come together and flow, and they have a kind of strategy and purpose in place. And very, very commonly, our thoughts and feelings are put together as a sort of survival strategy. And one of the most important parts of survival is to avoid danger. It's to properly relate with danger. And painful feelings are received basically because of that. More or less, when you think about it, we're not really going to be caused pain by things that truly and really are good for our survival and the survival of those around us and things like that. That does get a little complicated since, we're animals, but we're also social animals and we live in a civilization and things. But for the moment, just humor me. Mostly, that is when you're going to feel pain. And internally, your mind is going to respond to pain, or rather, you are going to respond to pain through your mind. But for now, we'll just say your mind is going to respond to pain by trying to deal with it in some way. And the problem is many strategies that we've adopted across time seem to be about kind of blocking off our conscious awareness of pain in some kind of way. And sometimes it's not always about truly blocking it off, but it's something like that. Basically, what we're attempting to do is to avoid experiencing it in our fullness, or in its fullness, and allowing it to really touch us. In some situations, that kind of makes sense. But if you're talking about someone who just is, say, sitting in their living room, finishing some coffee, or in my case, lots and lots of black tea, before they're about to drive to work, and they're starting to feel anxious about driving, not so easy to deal with. The reason for that is because driving is more or less necessary for most folks, especially for the purposes of this argument that I'm making. And you can't really ultimately ward it off. It's like you have to reverse that and learn how to relate with it in more of an open and resonant way. And I'm getting a little bit esoteric and froofy sounding, I get it. But it's something that once you start to click into it, you will see. So, watch out. Watch out when you find yourself really wanting to blame other people or external circumstances for your thoughts and feelings. It doesn't mean that you shame yourself or beat yourself up if you find that you're in an unhelpful pattern. It's a very common place to be. I'm a practicing psychologist and I'm hardly immune to that. But when you blame others for things, or you blame an external circumstance, you hold it as truly holding ultimate power for your thoughts and feelings. What happens is you kind of externalize in a way that perhaps impedes your ability to truly see what's happening inside you and really marshal the right kinds of orientation and action, whether those orientations and actions are outside of you or inside of you, because you've decided to locate the power for what's going on externally and then often focus on that and try to solve that, blame that, become angry at that, surrender to that, whatever it is. So watch out. Instead, look within. Follow your thoughts and feelings with as much openness as you can. If you're not used to doing this, it can be kind of overwhelming at first. But ultimately, I think it works out a lot better in the end. Thanks for listening.